in 1456 through the narrow streets of the capital of Wallachia. A rumor circulated among Persian merchants arriving from the east. They said a new voivode had taken the throne, not just any prince, but someone who had returned from the Turkish hell with fire in his eyes and an insatiable thirst for order. The smell of blood still hung in the nearby fields where Vlad Drăculea had faced Prince Vladislav in hand-to-hand combat just weeks before. The sword that pierced his rival's chest was still kept in his chambers, stained with an ancient promise. This would not be a common ascension to power. It would be a historical correction, a generational revenge. Târgoviște awoke under a leaden sky that September morning. 60,000 souls inhabited that city, which for decades had known only chaos. The alleys reeked of urine and rot. Children ran barefoot between mud puddles, while hooded men watched from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to snatch the purse from some distracted merchant. The Wallachian capital was a nest of serpents, and everyone knew it. But that morning, something had changed. Guards bearing the red dragon insignia marched through the main streets, their eyes sweeping every corner, every face, every hand that moved too quickly. The new voivode had made no speeches, had promised no changes, simply took the throne and waited, like a predator watching its prey. The older boyars, those who had served under Vlad's father, commented among themselves in the dark halls of the palaces. This 25-year-old youth who had spent his youth as a hostage of the Turks, who had seen his father murdered and his brother buried alive, was not like the other princes. There was something different in his eyes, something that made them look away when he stared at them directly, as if he could see through the lies, through the conspiracies, through the veneer of loyalty they all displayed. The first change came without warning. A known thief, a man named Radu, who for years had stolen in the markets without ever being caught, was found at dawn in the central square. His body was suspended on a wooden stake, piercing him from the base to emerge near his neck. His eyes were still open, fixed on a horror that death had not erased. No one dared remove the body. For 3 days, Radu remained there, swaying slightly when the wind blew from the mountains. Flies formed black clouds around him. Children were forbidden to look, but they looked anyway through the cracks in the windows, engraving that image in their minds forever. On the 4th morning, more stakes appeared. 5 men and 2 women, all known for crimes that previous justice had ignored. A merchant who used false scales, a procuress who sold girls to the Turks. 3 thieves who robbed travelers on the roads, an assassin who had killed for money, and a lesser boyar who had accepted bribes to favor the Saxons of Brașov. The message was as clear as the ice that formed on the peaks of the Carpathian. There would be no more impunity. There would be no more exceptions. It did not matter your blood, your wealth, or your connections. The law would be applied with surgical precision and calculated cruelty. Foreign merchants arriving in Târgoviște were paralyzed before that macabre spectacle. Some turned around and headed to other cities, where princes were more understanding. But others, the most curious or most desperate, remained, and they discovered something extraordinary. They could leave their merchandise in the streets overnight. They could carry gold openly. They could sleep with doors unlocked. Because in Târgoviște, under the vigilant eye of the stealing meant dying in a way that would make the bravest men pray never to have been born. A Venetian merchant named Antonio Bonelli recorded in his diary years later, I saw with my own eyes a city transformed by fear into a paradise of order. The streets that were once death traps became safer than the halls of Venice, and it caused only absolute terror. It was during the harsh winter of 1457 that the legend truly began. Snow covered Târgoviște like a white shroud, and the poor burned anything they could find to keep warm. The cold penetrated to the bones, and with it came hunger. The hunger that always made men commit madness. In the city's central square, near the fountain where washerwomen fetched water at dawn, something appeared that no one expected. A cup. Not just any wooden or cheap ceramic cup. A cup of pure gold, worked with intricate details that gleamed even under the gray winter light. Intertwined dragons formed the foot of the chalice. Tiny rubies marked the eyes of the mythological creatures. It was a work of art worth more than most houses in that city, and it was there, exposed, with no visible guards. Just a small iron support kept it elevated, as if it were an offering to the heavens. Beside it, a wooden plaque with a simple inscription: "For every thirsty drink in return." The first who saw the cup thought it was a trap, some kind of cruel test by the voice. They passed by at a distance, pretending not to see it, quickening their pace like those passing a corpse on the road. But thirst is stronger than fear, and eventually an old shepherd approached. His hands trembled not only from the cold, but from the terror of what might happen. He filled the cup at the fountain, drank. The water was cold and pure, returned the chalice to the support, waited. Nothing happened. No guard emerged from the shadows. No arrow cut through the air. The old man moved away quickly, looking back every 3 steps, expecting the blow that never came. The news spread like fire in dry straw. The voivode's golden cup, there in the city center, for anyone to use. Merchants, peasants, nobles, foreigners, everyone could drink from that golden chalice, as long as they returned it to its place. And so, day after day, week after week, month after month, the cup remained, unchanging, untouched, a silent symbol of something that no one could fully name. Was it power? Was it justice? Was it terror transformed into order? Or was it simply proof that a man can break human nature through absolute fear? The years passed, and the cup became part of Târgoviște's identity. Travelers came from distant kingdoms just to see it, touch it, feel the cold gold under their fingers, and contemplate the impossible paradox. A fortune exposed, unprotected, in a city where before even nails were stolen from the markets. Stories began to circulate. A Polish nobleman allegedly tried to take the cup, hiding it under his cloak. He was found impaled before he could leave the city, the cup gleaming beside his body like a silent accusation. Another tale spoke of a group of Saxons who had planned to steal the chalice during the night. They awoke with guards at their doors, though no one knew how the voivode had discovered the plan before it was even executed. Truth or legend, it did not matter. The effect was real. The cup remained, and with it a tacit understanding. Vlad Drăculea saw everything, knew everything, and would punish everything. A Franciscan monk named Brother Gregory, who passed through Târgoviște in 1460, wrote in his Chronicles, "I saw a city governed not by written laws, but by a terror so deep that it transformed into something resembling virtue. Men do not steal not because it is wrong, but because punishment is certain and horrendous." Is it possible to build paradise on the foundations of hell? The Prince of Wallachia seems to believe so. The stakes around the city multiplied, no longer as occasional punishments, but as a permanent forest of warnings. Thieves, murderers, traitors, Turkish spies, corrupt boyars, prostitutes who robbed clients, dishonest merchants, all ended the same way. Suspended between heaven and earth, neither dead enough to be forgotten, nor alive enough to be saved, and in the center of that forest of horror, gleaming under the sun or under the moon, always the cup, golden, perfect, untouched, a beacon of order in a sea of terror. The ultimate symbol that the impossible was possible when a man was willing to go beyond any limit that humanity had imposed on itself. But there was something few noticed, something only the most attentive observers noted. The cup was not just a test for thieves. It was a test for the voivode himself. Every day, looking at that chalice gleaming in the square, Vlad asked himself, how far can a man control chaos before becoming chaos itself? In 1462, 6 years after the cup was placed in the square, an event would test Vlad's system in a way no one expected. An Armenian merchant named Kevork arrived in Târgoviște carrying a fortune in silks and spices. He had heard the stories about the city where nothing was stolen, but remained skeptical. No place was like that. It was impossible. On the first night, following the city's tradition, Kevork left his loaded cart outside the inn, only tying up the horses. He locked nothing. He hid nothing. He slept poorly, imagining waking to find everything disappeared, laughing at him for his naivety. At dawn, he ran to the street. His cart was exactly where he had left it. He counted the packages, all the silks, all the spice flasks, everything intact. Almost disappointed at not having a dramatic story to tell, Kevork prepared to depart. It was then he noticed 160 gold ducats were missing, a significant sum, but not devastating. Enough to be painful, but not to ruin him. He counted 3 times to be sure. 160. Exact. Trembling not from cold, but from uncertainty about what to do, Kevork headed to the voivode's palace. He was received not by hostile guards, but by a courteous officer who led him directly into Vlad's presence. The prince was seated on a simple oak throne, none of the exaggerated luxuries of other rulers, his eyes fixed on the merchant with an intensity that made Kevork feel his soul was being read like an open scroll. Kevork explained the theft. Vlad showed no surprise, showed no anger, simply nodded and said, "Your gold will be returned. Remain in the palace tonight as my guest. Tomorrow everything will be resolved." That same afternoon, proclamations were posted throughout Târgoviște. The thief must return the money before dawn, or the entire city would be considered complicit. The punishment would be collective. Stakes would be raised not for dozens, but for hundreds. During the night, while Kevork was served on silver plates and slept in fine linen sheets, something was happening in the streets. And at dawn, when he returned to his cart, the merchant found something that would make his story echo through the centuries. The 160 ducats were there, but there was 1 ducat extra. 106. Kevork took the extra coin, his heart racing. He returned to the palace, informed the voivode about the error. And it was then that Vlad smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes, a smile that froze the blood. "Your honesty saved your life," said the prince. The thief was captured during the night. He is being impaled now as we speak. But I placed that extra ducat as a test. if you had remained silent, you would have joined him on the stake. Because stealing from a thief is still theft. And in my land there are no exceptions. The story of the Golden Cup and the Armenian merchant spread through Christian kingdoms like a dark prophecy. In the halls of Buddha, in the markets of Venice, in the courts of diplomats and merchants debated the same enigma. How had one man managed to transform one of the most violent cities in the Balkans into a place where gold was safer in the streets than in vaults? Years later, when the dust of events settled and historians began to gather the fragments of this extraordinary era, they discovered something disturbing. The cup never disappeared because no one dared steal it. But it was not just the fear of stakes that protected it. It was something deeper, an invisible system of surveillance that made each citizen of Târgoviște become an involuntary guardian of order. Documents preserved in the archives of the city of Brașov reveal a crucial detail. Vlad not only punished criminals, he generously rewarded those who reported them. A carpenter who reported a theft received the equivalent of 3 months' work in silver coins. A washerwoman who identified a suspicious foreigner gained commercial privileges. A merchant who exposed fraud was exempted from taxes for a year. The Prince of Wallachia had created something revolutionary and terrifying at the same time, a network of informants where each person was simultaneously watched and watcher, where paranoia became patriotism, where betraying one's neighbor was considered civic virtue. The Benedictine Friar Michael of Salzburg, who visited Vlad's court in 1461 as an emissary of the Pope, wrote in his confidential report, "This prince does not govern through love, but through something more powerful than love, through the absolute certainty of consequences. Every man in his kingdom knows that his acts have witnesses even when he believes he is alone." It is as if God were replaced by an omnipresent tyrant, and the result is a forced morality that perfectly imitates genuine virtue. But there were contradictions in the accounts. While German pamphlets painted Vlad as a bloodthirsty monster, Slavic chronicles presented a different perspective. For Wallachian peasants, the Impaler was not a demon. He was a liberator. For the first time in generations, they could work their fields without fear of bandits. They could travel to fairs without being robbed. Their daughters could walk without being kidnapped by Turkish traffickers. The Golden Cup symbolized this impossible duality. It was simultaneously the greatest evidence of tyranny and the greatest symbol of order. It was there, gleaming under the Wallachian sun, defying all human logic about what was possible when law was applied without mercy. The true nature of Vlad's system began to emerge through an extraordinary document discovered in 1938 in the Vatican's secret archives. A letter sent by Vlad himself to Pope Pius II in 1460, defending his methods against accusations from Saxon merchants who had fled from his territory. In the letter, written in impeccable ecclesiastical Latin, Vlad did not deny the brutality. He justified it with cold and implacable logic. "Your Holiness questions me about the methods I employ to maintain order. Allow me to clarify. A thief who steals bread to feed his family deserves mercy. A thief who steals from greed deserves the stake. A boyar who accepts bribes from the Turks is not merely a criminal. He is a traitor to Christendom, and traitors do not deserve quick deaths." The document continued with disturbing details about the judicial system Vlad had implemented. Each crime had a specific punishment. Minor theft, loss of hand. Major theft, impalement. Treason, slow impalement, where the victim took days to die. Lying under oath, the tongue was torn out before impalement. Adultery, both lovers were impaled together, facing each other. But there were nuances that propaganda pamphlets ignored. Vlad offered complete pardon to any criminal who surrendered voluntarily and confessed their crimes. He offered protection to any witness willing to testify against the corrupt, regardless of their social position. And, most surprisingly, he paid compensation to crime victims using the state's personal treasury when criminals had no assets to compensate for their damages. Romanian Historia, Constantine Giurescu, analyzing tax records from 1457 to 1462, discovered something revealing. During Vlad's reign, tax collection increased 300%, not because taxes became higher, but because they were finally being paid. Tax collectors, previously easy targets for bribes and intimidation, now did their work with deadly precision because everyone knew what happened to those who tried to deceive the system. The cup in the square was the physical representation of this principle. It was not just about honesty, it was about absolute control, about the ability of a single man to impose his will on 60,000 people through a system of terror so efficient it became invisible. People no longer saw the stakes around the city. They had become part of the landscape. Normality through horror. An anonymous poet of the era wrote, "Rosuz that were preserved in Romanian folklore. When the dragon sleeps, the rats dance. When the dragon awakens, only the just survive." But who defines justice when the judge is also the executioner? The system began to show cracks in 1462, when war with the Ottoman Empire intensified. Vlad needed every able man to fight, but his own laws had created a psychological prison. People were so afraid of violating any rule that many refused to leave their homes, even when summoned for military service. It was in this context that the cup disappeared for the first time. It was not stolen. It was removed by Vlad himself, a strategic decision that few understood at the time, but which modern historians interpret as a recognition that the symbol had become more powerful than the reality it represented. Military documents preserved in Hungarian archives revealed that Vlad faced an impossible dilemma. His army needed to plunder Turkish territory to sustain itself during the winter campaign. But how to order his men to steal from enemies when he had trained an entire generation to believe that stealing, under any circumstances, meant death? The solution was characteristically brutal and pragmatic. Vlad divided his crimes into categories: stealing from Wallachans, death, stealing from Turks, reward, killing Wallachans, death, killing Turks, glory. The absolute moral system needed exceptions, and these exceptions began to erode the foundation of certainty upon which the entire edifice was built. The Orthodox monk Pacomirs, who served as chaplain in Vlad's military campaigns, recorded in his memoirs a revealing moment. During the siege of a Turkish fortress, a Wallachian soldier questioned whether they could drink from the conquered city's fountain without the voivode's explicit permission. Vlad allegedly laughed, a long and bitter laugh, before responding, "Drink, eat, take what you want, because when we fight demons, we need to become demons. And when the war ends, we will return to being men, or we will try." This forced duality created a generation of psychologically fragmented. At home, they were obedient and virtuous citizens. In enemy territory, they became predators without mercy. The transition between these states was marked by crossing borders and by the explicit permission of their prince. It was as if Vlad had created a release valve for all the violence suppressed by his system of domestic terror. But the cup remained in collective memory as a symbol of a time when everything made sense, when rules were simple and absolute, when every man knew exactly where the line was between life and death, between right and wrong. The true meaning of the cup was only fully understood centuries later, when historians began to connect the events in Wallachia with broader philosophical and political movements. Professor Nicolae, Iorga, from the University of Bucharest, published in 1936 a revolutionary study entitled The Psychology of Functional Terror in Medieval Europe. Iorga argued that Vlad was not simply a cruel tyrant. He was an involuntary social experimenter, testing the limits of what we might call coercive social contract. The Golden Cup was the perfect experimental variable, a continuous and public test of whether human morality could be externally imposed through the certainty of severe punishment. The results were mixed and deeply disturbing. For 6 years, 60,000 people behaved as if they were incorruptibly honest. But was it genuine honesty, or just terror disguised as virtue? When fear was removed, when Vlad fell from power in 1462, what happened? Traveler accounts from 1463 paint a desolate picture. Târgoviște returned to chaos within weeks. Thefts, murders, corruption, as if the years of forced order had never existed. The cup, returned to the square by the new ruler Radu the Handsome, was stolen on the first night. It was never found. It was as if all that imposed morality was a thin membrane over an abyss of natural violence. And when the pressure was removed, when the stakes were torn down and criminals pardoned in the spirit of national reconciliation, the membrane ruptured instantly. This raises a philosophical question that echoed through the centuries. Did Vlad create a better society or simply suppress human nature temporarily? Was it possible to transform men through fear, or only force them to wear masks of civilization while keeping their primitive instincts intact? Political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, writing his Leviathan in 1651, though probably never having heard the specific details about Vlad, articulated a principle that fit perfectly with the Wallachian experiment. Fear of violent death is the fundamental passion upon which all social order must be built. The cup of Târgoviște was the physical expression of this principle taken to its logical extreme, and its fate, disappearing as soon as the force that protected it was removed, seemed to confirm the theory that order without sustainable terror was elusive. The final revelation about the cup in Vlad's system came from an unexpected source. In 1989, after the fall of the communist regime in Romania, secret archives were opened to the public, among them records of archaeological excavations carried out in Târgoviște. During the 1970s, the archaeologists had found something extraordinary beneath the old central square, a network of tunnels and observation chambers built during Vlad's reign. These tunnels allowed guards to observe the main square without being seen. There were specific positions aligned with the location where the cup was displayed. In other words, the cup was never unprotected. It was a carefully constructed illusion. Guards continuously watched from hidden positions. Anyone who approached with suspicious intentions was marked before even touching the chalice. The system was not based only on abstract psychological terror. It was sustained by constant and physical surveillance. This discovery completely transformed historical interpretation. Vlad had not created a system based on morality internalized through fear. He had created a total surveillance state where the omnipresence of the observer made transgression materially impossible, not morally unlikely. Professor Elena Popescu, from the Institute of Southeast European Studies, published in 2012 a devastating analysis. The cup of Târgoviște was not a symbol of honesty. It was a symbol of panopticon, a concept that philosopher Jeremy Bentham would only articulate 3 centuries later, but which Vlad Drăculea intuitively implemented in the mountains of medieval Wallachia. Benthams Panopticon was a prison designed so that prisoners ever knew if they were being watched, leading them to internalize discipline. The crucial difference was that Vlad did not want his subjects to internalize anything. He wanted them to know they were always being watched. He wanted fear to be conscious, present, overwhelming. And it worked for 6 years. It worked perfectly. An entire city transformed into a showcase of artificial order. But it was precisely that, artificial, sustained not by genuine transformation of human hearts, but by an apparatus of terror so efficient it became invisible to those living within it. The cup, then, was not a test of honesty. It was theater. An elaborate staging where the audience did not know they were being watched by hidden actors. And when the play ended, when the curtains closed and Vlad left the stage, everything collapsed because there was nothing real sustaining the illusion. But there was something no historian could deny. During those 6 years, the people of Târgoviște lived in safety. The weak were not exploited. The rich did not buy justice. The powerful did not escape consequences. It was terrible justice, built on foundations of horror, but it was justice. And for many peasants who lived under that regime, it was the only time in their lives when they experienced something resembling equity. The final question remains unanswered. Is it better to live in chaotic freedom or in terrifying order? Is it possible to have security without sacrificing humanity? The Impaler believed so, that the end justified any means, that a generation of terror could create future generations of peace. He was wrong. The cup disappeared, the stakes rotted, and Wallachia returned to being exactly what it was before him. Perhaps some historical experiments should serve only as warnings. Perhaps the golden cup should shine in memory, not as a symbol of success, but as a reminder that order without freedom is just a well-decorated prison. And yet, in the mountain villages of Romania, where the descendants of those who lived under Vlad still tell stories to their grandchildren, the cup is remembered with something that is not exactly nostalgia, but also not pure horror. It is something more complex. The recognition that at least once, even for the wrong reasons, even through the most terrible methods, there was a moment when justice was truly blind, when rich and poor, powerful and weak, all faced the same consequences for their actions. Perhaps that is why the legend of the cup survived 6 centuries. Not because it was real, but because it represented something humanity has always desired and never managed to create. A world where temptation exists, but no one succumbs to it, even if the price of that resistance was living under the permanent shadow of blood-stained stakes. In the next chapter of Lost Legends, we will dive into the Bloody Easter, where Vlad's terror would find its most political and brutal expression. 500 boyars, dressed in their finest clothes, celebrating the resurrection of Christ, discovered that some debts are only paid with blood. Prepare to discover how a seemingly innocent question transformed a sacred banquet into a massacre that would change Wallachia's power structure forever. Because sometimes what seems like legend is just the part of history that hasn't been told yet.